Hi, welcome to the lesson for Chapter 2 for A Wrinkle in Time. You have either in your assignments in, I almost said Schoology, but in Teams, or on the worksheet that I handed out, a paper that looks like this. We're going to look at just a little bit in the beginning. So Chapter 2 is called Mrs. Who. So last chapter we had Mrs. What's It. Now we have Mrs. Who. You're going to use your interactive notes for conflict to complete the following definitions. So let's take a look. In your notebook, you made an interactive for conflict. These are your internal, external. Down below, we wrote our notes for conflict. And this exact definition is also on my poster behind me. So I'll make myself a little bigger so you can maybe see the poster to copy from. Conflict is up here. Oh, it's kind of small. You might not be able to read it. But it is a struggle between opposing characters or forces. So if we go back to our worksheet, pull that up here. A struggle between opposing forces. You're filling in those lines. I'm going to mention the vocabulary words right now in case we come across them while we are reading. I'm going to hold off on going over the specific questions until later. So we have the words belligerent, antagonistic, and assimilate. We're going to be looking for what page they're on and either take the definition that I will give you in the lesson, or you will need to look the word up. So we're turning to Chapter 2. And of course, I didn't bookmark mine. If you have the white copy that is on page 22, I don't have my other book handy, so hopefully my talking here gave you enough time to find the beginning of Chapter 2. All right, please follow along with me while I read. When Meg woke to the jangling of her alarm clock, the wind was still blowing, but the sun was shining. The worst of the storm was over. She sat up in bed, shaking her head to clear it. It must have been a dream. She'd been frightened by the storm and worried about the tramp, so she just dreamed about going down to the kitchen and seeing Mrs. What's-It, and having her mother get all frightened and upset by that word. What was it? Tess, something. She dressed hurriedly up, picked up the kitten, still curled up on the bed, and dumped it unceremoniously on the floor. The kitten yawned, stretched, gave a piteous meow, trotted out of the attic and down the stairs. Meg made her bed and hurried after it. In the kitchen, her mother was making French toast, and the twins were already at the table. The kitten was lapping milk out of a saucer. "Where's Charles?" Meg asked. "Still asleep. We had a rather interrupted night, if you remember." "I hoped it was a dream," Meg said. Her mother carefully turned over 4 slices of French toast, then said in a steady voice, "No, Meg, don't hope it was a dream. I don't understand it any more than you do, but one thing I've learned is that you don't have to understand things for them to be. I'm sorry I showed you I was upset. Your father and I used to have a joke about a tesseract." "What is a tesseract?" Meg asked. "It's a concept." Mrs. Murray handed the twins the syrup. "I'll try to explain it to you later. There isn't time before school." "I don't see why you didn't wake us up," Denny said. "It's a gyp we missed out on all the fun." "You'll be a lot more awake in school today than I will." Meg took her French toast to the table. "Who cares?" Sandy said. "If you're going to let old tramps come into the house in the middle of the night, Mother, you ought to have Den and me around to protect you." "After all, Father would expect us to," Denny's added. "We know you have a great mind and all, Mother," Sandy said, "but you don't have much sense. And certainly Meg and Charles don't." "I know, we're morons." Meg was bitter. "I wish you wouldn't be such a dope, Meg. Syrup, please." Sandy reached across the table. "You don't have to take everything so personally. Use a happy medium, for heaven's sake. You just goof around in school and look out the windows and don't pay any attention." There's that term happy medium again. "You just make things harder for yourself," Denny said. And Charles Wallace is going to have an awful time next year when he starts school. We know he's bright, but he's so funny when he's around other people. And they're so used to thinking he's dumb. I don't know what's going to happen to him. Sandy and I'll sock anybody who picks on him, but that's about all we can do. Let's not worry about next year till we get through this one, Mrs. Murray said. More French toast, boys? At school, Meg was tired and her eyelids sagged and her mind wandered. In social studies, she was asked to name the principal imports and exports of Nicaragua. And though she had to look them up dutifully the evening before, now she could remember none of them. The teacher was sarcastic, the rest of the class laughed, and she flung herself down in her seat in a fury. Who cares about imports and exports of Nicaragua anyhow? She muttered. If you're going to be rude, Margaret, you may leave the room, the teacher said. Okay, I will, Meg flounced out. During study hall, the principal sent for her. What seems to be the problem now, Meg? He asked, pleasantly enough. Meg looked sulkily down at the floor. Nothing, Mr. Jenkins. Miss Porter tells me you were inexcusably rude. Meg shrugged. Don't you realize that you are just making everything harder for yourself by your attitude? The principal asked. Now, Meg, I'm convinced that you can do the work and keep up with your grade if you will apply yourself. But some of your teachers are not. You're going to have to do something about yourself. Nobody can do it for you. Meg was silent. Well, what about it, Meg? I don't know what to do, Meg said. You could do your homework, for one thing. Wouldn't your mother help you? I asked her to. Meg, is something troubling you? Are you unhappy at home? Mr. Jenkins asked. At last, Meg looked at him, pushing at her glasses in a characteristic gesture. Everything's fine at home. I'm glad to hear it, but I know it must be hard on you to have your father away. Meg eyed the principal warily and ran her tongue over the barbed line of her braces. Have you heard any news from him lately? Even the principal's wondering about Dad. Meg was sure it was not only imagination that made her feel that behind Mr. Jenkins' surface concern was a gleam of avid curiosity. Wouldn't he like to know, she thought, and if I knew anything, he's the last person I'd tell. Well, one of the last. The postmistress must know that it was almost a year now since the last letter. And heaven knows how many people she'd told, or what unkind guesses she'd made about the reason for the long silence. So remember, I mentioned this book was written in the 1960s. They do have telephones, but it's before email and internet and all of those different ways that we would communicate. So the main way that they would communicate would be through letters. So the postmistress at the post office is the one who kind of, she gives them their letters and realizes they haven't been getting any for a whole year. Mr. Jenkins waited for an answer, but Meg only shrugged. Just what was your father's line of business? Mr. Jenkins asked. Some kind of scientist, wasn't he? He is a physicist. Meg bared her teeth to reveal the two ferocious lines of braces. Meg, don't you think you'd make a better adjustment to life if you faced facts? I do face facts, Meg said. They're lots easier to face than people, I can tell you. Then why don't you face facts about your father? You leave my father out of it, Meg shouted. Stop bellowing, Mr. Jenkins said sharply. Do you want the entire school to hear you? So what? Meg demanded. I'm not ashamed of anything I'm saying. Are you? Mr. Jenkins sighed. Do you enjoy being the most belligerent, uncooperative child in the school? So that was one of our vocabulary words. The word belligerent is on page 26 in this yellow book. And I'm going to pause for a second and find the other page for you. In the other book, you should be on page 32. So hopefully you knew that already because you were following along with me. There's a little bit of a hint as to what that word means. We have belligerent, and right after it, we see the word uncooperative. They're not quite synonyms, but it lets you know the negative context of belligerent. So I'm going to encourage you to look that one up and see more specifically what it means. Meg ignored this. She leaned over the desk toward the principal. Mr. Jenkins, you've met my mother, haven't you? You can't accuse her of not facing facts, can you? She's a scientist. She has doctor's degrees in both biology and bacteriology. Her business is facts. When she tells me that my father isn't coming home, I'll believe it. As long as she says father is coming home, then I'll believe that. Mr. Jenkins sighed again. No doubt your mother wants to believe that your father is coming home. Meg, very well. I can't do anything else with you. Go on back to study hall. Try to be a little less antagonistic. Maybe your work would improve if your general attitude were more tractable. And there's our second vocabulary word, I believe was on the list, antagonistic. In the yellow book is on page 27, and in the other book it's on page 33. So I want you to think about this a little bit. I know that I have referenced in class several times protagonist and antagonist, and you can probably see those posters over top of my head. And some of you seemed completely unfamiliar with both of those words. So I'm going to review those for a second. These are not the definitions of antagonistic, but when we look at the root and the prefix of these words, it will help you understand the definition of antagonistic. So we have protagonist, which is typically the main character of our story. That pro is a positive word, is good characteristics. Antagonist is a character or force in conflict with the protagonist. It is usually our villain or our bad guy in the story. Meg is not our bad guy. She's going to be our protagonist, but she's acting in an antagonistic way. We can see here she's arguing with Mr. Jenkins. And if you are going to antagonize someone, you're causing trouble, causing harm. So I'm not giving you a specific definition, just trying to help you understand it. Please look up the definition for antagonistic. All right, we are right after the break. When Meg got home from school, her mother was in the lab. The twins were at Little League, and Charles Wallace, the kitten, and Fortinbras were waiting for her. Fortinbras jumped up, put his front paws on her shoulders, and gave her a kiss. And the kitten rushed to his empty saucer and mewed loudly. Come on, Charles Wallace said, let's go. Where? Meg asked. I'm hungry, Charles. I don't want to go anywhere till I've had something to eat. She was still sore from the interview with Mr. Jenkins, and her voice sounded cross. Charles Wallace looked at her thoughtfully as she went to the refrigerator and gave the kitten some milk, then drank a mugful herself. He handed her a paper bag. Here's a sandwich and some cookies and an apple. I thought we'd better go see Mrs. Whatsit. Once again, Charles Wallace thought ahead. He knew what she'd want and prepared for her. They're going to go see Mrs. Whatsit again. Oh, golly, Meg said. Why, Charles? You're still uneasy about her, aren't you? Charles asked. Well, yes. Don't be. She's all right, I promise you. She's on our side. How do you know? Meg, he said impatiently, I know. But why should we go see her now? I want to find out about that Tesseract thing. Didn't you see how it upset Mother? You know when Mother can't control the way she feels, when she lets us see she's upset, then it's something big. Meg thought for a moment. Okay, let's go. But let's take Fortinbras with us. Well, of course, he needs the exercise. They set off, Fortinbras rushing ahead, then doubling back to the two children, then leaping off again. The Murrays lived about 4 miles out of the village. Behind the house was a pine woods, and it was through this that Charles Wallace took Meg. Charles, you know she's going to get in awful trouble, Mrs. Whatsit, I mean, If they find out she's broken into the haunted house and taking Mrs. Buncombe's sheets and everything, they could send her to jail. One of the reasons I want to go over this afternoon is to warn them. Then I told you she was there with her two friends. I'm not even sure if it was Mrs. Whatsit herself who took the sheets, though I wouldn't put it past her. But what would she want all those sheets for? I intend to ask her, Charles Wallace said, and to tell them they'd better be more careful. I don't really think they'll let anybody find them, but I just thought we ought to mention the possibility. Sometimes during vacations, some of the boys go out there looking for thrills, but I don't think anybody's apt to right now, what with basketball and everything. They walked in silence for a moment through the fragrant woods, the rusty pine needles gentle under their feet. Up and above them, the wind made music in the branches. Charles Wallace slipped his hand confidingly in Meg's, and the sweet little boy gesture warmed her so that she felt the tense knot inside her begin to loosen. Charles loves me at any rate, she thought. School awful again today? He asked after a while. Yes. I got sent to Mr. Jenkins. He made snide remarks about father. Charles Wallace nodded sagely. I know. How do you know? So very insightful. I have a mark here again. We keep seeing this over and over about Charles Wallace, especially for a 5-year-old. To be so in tune to another person and understand how they're feeling and know things about them. If any of you have younger brothers and sisters and think about the way that they act, I think of my 5-year-old, she doesn't think about other people very often. It's still very self-centered. She's just now starting to realize there are other people that matter versus just her. Sorry, honey. All right. Charles Wallace shook his head. I can't quite explain. You tell me, that's all. But I never say anything. You just seem to know. Everything about you tells me, Charles said. How about the twins? Meg asked. Do you know about them too? I suppose I could if I wanted to, if they needed me, but it's sort of tiring, so I just concentrate on you and Mother. You mean you read our minds? Charles Wallace looked troubled. I don't think it's that. It's being able to understand a sort of language, like sometimes if I concentrate very hard, I can understand the wind talking with the trees. You tell me, you see, sort of inadvertently. That's a good word, isn't it? I got Mother to look it up in the dictionary for me this morning. I really must learn to read, except I'm afraid it will make it awfully hard for me in school next year if I already know things. I think it will be better if people go on thinking I'm not very bright. They won't hate me quite so much. Ahead of them, Fortinbras started barking loudly, the warning bay that usually told them that a car was coming up the road or that someone was at the door. Somebody's here, Charles Wallace said sharply. Somebody's hanging around the house. Come on. He started to run, his short legs straining. At the edge of the woods, Fortinbras stood in front of a boy, barking furiously. As they came panting up, the boy said, For crying out loud, call off your dog. Who is he? Charles Wallace asked Meg. Calvin O'Keefe. He's in regional, but he's older than I am. He's a big bug. I'm going to pause there for a second. Later on, when you're doing your questions, you do have to introduce the new characters. So I want you to pay attention to Calvin O'Keefe and what we learn about him, because you're going to have an answer that you need to write about who he is. It's all right, fella. I'm not going to hurt you, the boy said to Fortinbras. Sit, Fort, Charles Wallace commanded, and Fortinbras dropped to his haunches in front of the boy, a low growl still pulsing in his dark throat. Okay, Charles Wallace put his hands on his hips. Now tell us what you're doing here. I might ask you the same of you, the boy said with some indignation. Oh, wasn't that a word last time, or indignantly? It's just a different form, indignation, kind of angrily aroused by something that they're accusing him. Aren't you two of the Murray kids? This isn't your property, is it? He started to move, but Fortinbras' growl grew louder and he stopped. Tell me about him, Meg, Charles Wallace demanded. What would I know about him? Meg asked. He's a couple of grades above me, and he's on the basketball team. Just because I'm tall, Calvin sounded a little embarrassed. Tall, he certainly was, and skinny. His bony wrists stuck out of the sleeves of his blue sweater. His worn corduroy trousers were 3 inches too short. He had orange hair that needed cutting and the appropriate freckles to go with it. His eyes were an oddly bright blue. "Tell us what you're doing here," Charles Wallace said. "What is this, the 3rd degree? Aren't you the one who's supposed to be the moron?" So he just recognized who's talking to him. Remember, Charles Wallace normally does not talk in front of other people outside of the family. And here's this teenage boy, and he's accusing him and questioning him. And the boy all of a sudden realizes, "Hey, I thought you were dumb. I thought you couldn't talk." Meg flushed with rage, but Charles Wallace answered placidly, calmly. "That's right. If you want me to call my dog off, you'd better give." "Most peculiar moron I've ever met," Calvin said. "I just came to get away from my family." Charles Wallace nodded. "What kind of family?" "They all have runny noses. I'm 3rd from the top of 11 kids. I'm a sport." I want you to pay attention to this description too. So there's 11 kids. He's the 3rd oldest. And this weird comment, "I'm a sport," it doesn't mean that he's athletic. So we'll take a look and see what he means. At that, Charles Wallace grinned widely. "So am I." "I don't mean like in baseball," Calvin said. "Neither do I." "I mean like in biology," Calvin said suspiciously. And here's what they mean by sport. "A change in gene," Charles Wallace quoted, "resulting in the appearance in the offspring of a character which is not present in the parents, but which is potentially transmissible to its offspring," meaning that they're different than everybody else in their family. "What gives around here?" Calvin asked. "I was told you couldn't talk." "Thinking I'm a moron gives people something to feel smug about," Charles Wallace said. "Why should I disillusion them? How old are you, Cal?" 14. "What grade?" "Junior, 11th. "Wait a minute. How many of you, well, I was thinking I had 8th grade. 7th grade. How old are you guys?" 12, 13, maybe 14. "Are you in 11th grade? Are you a junior?" "No, my oldest daughter is a sophomore this year, and she's 15. He responds, "I'm bright. Listen, did anybody ask you to come here this afternoon?" So he's a couple grades ahead. Charles Wallace, holding Fort by the collar, looked at Calvin suspiciously. "What do you mean, asked?" Calvin shrugged. "So don't trust me, do you?" "I don't distrust you," Charles Wallace said. "Do you want to tell me why you're here then?" "Fort and Meg and I decided to go for a walk. We often do in the afternoon." Calvin dug his hands down in his pockets. "You're holding out on me." "So are you," Charles said. "Okay, old sport," Calvin said. "I'll tell you this much. Sometimes I get a feeling about things. You might call it a compulsion." Do you know what compulsion means? Constraint, obligation, because one is compelled. Not a very good definition, but it's the concise Oxford. Okay, Calvin said. "I must remember I'm preconditioned in my concept of your mentality." Meaning that he's still not used to the idea that he's so brilliant. He's expecting him to be, not talking, not know much as a 5-year-old. Meg sat down on the coarse grass at the edge of the woods. Fort gently twisted his collar out of Charles Wallace's hands and came over to Meg, lying down beside her and putting his head in her lap. Calvin tried now politely to direct his words toward Meg as well as Charles Wallace. "When I get this feeling, this compulsion, I always do what it tells me. I can't explain where it comes from or how I get it, and it doesn't happen very often, but I obey it. And this afternoon, I had a feeling that I must come over to the haunted house. That's all I know, kid. I'm not holding anything back. Maybe it's because I'm supposed to meet you. You tell me." And that's actually where I'm going to stop for today. I think we're at about halfway, about 30 minutes into our lesson. So I will see you for the next lesson. Bye.